Hours after North Korea unveiled what appeared to be a large number of new and advanced missiles, the regime fired a test ballistic missile, likely from a submarine, that barely got off the ground before exploding. At his club in Florida, President Trump celebrated the Easter holiday and let the Pentagon do the talking. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis released a terse two-sentence statement. Quote, "The president and his military team are aware of North Korea's most recent unsuccessful missile launch. The president has no further comment." Speaking at the demilitarized zone.
Let's stop right there really quickly. Richard Haas, this is something that just screams for a tweet from Donald Trump, and yet you get a sense that everybody around him said, you want to tweet at Meryl Streep, that's fine, but an errant tweet that pushes this, as McCain called him, fat, crazy kid in the corner, could actually start something serious. And so there was a pretty good bit of restraint this weekend.
Well, this has been disciplined. You had H.R. McMaster on one of the shows. As you say, it was what the president didn't tweet. And this looks to be quite choreographed. Very strong diplomacy with China. The president continuing to, if you will, to play the China card here. We're really working closely with Beijing to put pressure on these guys. A lot of mystery about whether this was simply a failed launch or whether American cyber capabilities had had something to do with it. And again, no clarification.
How about a third option? How about China? You know China's there, and China's already sent a message. You know, we know you've promised to launch here. It would be in your best interest for this launch to not be successful.
Well, that's certainly true in the sense not be successful. In a funny sort of way, we're even more worried about North Korean missile advance right now than we are about nuclear warhead advance, because we think they've got pretty much the weapons. We're worried about the long-range missiles, the distance and the accuracy. So there's that look. Again, it could be an external thing. It could simply be that missile tests failed. They've had failed missile tests before. But what it shows is that essentially the entire conversation has changed. For a couple of decades, this has drifted, and North Korea has made steady advance. And what essentially the new administration has done and said, we're not going to tolerate this. As the Secretary of State said, strategic patience is over. So this has now come to a head. And what we're basically telling China, if you don't want a massive crisis on the Korean Peninsula that could involve war and all the uncertainty that involves, you would better use that influence you say you don't have, that you know and we know you do have.
And you seem to think this is a good thing.
Absolutely. I think the combination of credible threats of American military force, Chinese engagement as opposed to letting it drift, and just possibly some signals that the United States might be prepared to accept something less than, as a first step, complete North Korean denuclearization. This could be setting the stage for something, yes.
So speaking at the demilitarized zone just steps from North Korea, Vice President Mike Pence said all options are on the table. It was a message repeated by President Trump's national security advisor, H.R. McMaster.
This latest missile test just fits into a pattern of provocative and destabilizing and threatening behavior on the part of the North Korean regime. And I think there's an international consensus now, including the Chinese and the Chinese leadership, that this is a situation that just can't continue. What is clear, as long as their behavior continues, as long as they continue missile development, even though this was a failed missile, they get better and they learn lessons. And so what's critical is for them to stop this destabilizing behavior, stop the development of these weapons, and denuclearize.
Elise, you worked in the State Department. Obviously, big changes have happened over the past couple of weeks, and you really sensed it this weekend as well.
Well, I still am really anxious about getting these ambassadors in key regions surrounding North Korea. We need an ambassador in South Korea. We need an ambassador in China and Japan. We need people in the region ready to deal with this crisis. But I actually do think that it's quite promising that General McMaster was speaking about this from Kabul. He's in Afghanistan. The administration is showing that they can manage multiple crises and are engaged, not just, you know, with North Korea, but around the globe.
And Harold, China, remember, the president started off poorly with China supposedly because of the Taiwan call. But right now, as of today, you've got to say they've played it pretty well.
Well, I would agree. I think.
And here's his tweet on Sunday. Why would I call China a currency manipulator when they're working with us on the North Korean problem? We will see what happens. Well, exactly. You shouldn't call China a currency.
We do need personnel everywhere. I hope Bill Haggard in Japan gets his job. Haas is right. This is interesting. I guess the question I would have for Haas, and this may be the right thing, is what if some have speculated that there's a way to take out this young leader, that is, I guess Mr. McCain has a unique way of describing him, but it's the way to take him out. What confidence or ideas do we have about who might emerge as a successor? I know when we talk about Iran and talk about parts of the Middle East, we talk about young populations of very educated people who may emerge as leaders. Perhaps I'm just unclear and uneducated about this region. What happens if he is removed, if it goes a step further? And I guess to take it one step back, what kind of influence does China actually have? I mean, I think as Americans think about this.
Short answer is this is the hardest intelligence target in the world for the United States. It's the most opaque country, so we don't have a good answer. If he were to disappear tomorrow for natural or unnatural causes, we don't know who would take his place. We don't know whether anyone would take his place or whether there would be instability. We simply don't know.
Let's bring into the conversation former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, now the Dean of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, retired four-star Navy Admiral James Stavridis. He is Chief International Security and Diplomacy Analyst for NBC News and MSNBC. Good to have you on this morning.
Admiral, thanks so much for being with us. Do you agree with Richard Haas that the president's team has put together a good North Korean policy right now, a strategy?
I think it looks like it. We'll know more as events unfold. But really, there's sort of three buckets here. Richard did a great job, as usual, of describing the first one, which is China. And in the end, I agree, the road to Pyongyang runs through Beijing. The other two buckets are cyber and special forces, kind of a covert program. And the third one is very overt, which would be direct strikes like Syria, like using the mother of all bomb to go after the deep and hardened targets over there. The second two strategies are going to cause a lot of instability. As Harold just asked, we don't know what comes after if you do the decapitation option. So you keep getting driven back to that China strategy, and I think it's the right one, and so far it appears that's the road we're on.
Admiral, I'm going to ask you and then also ask Richard really quickly. Disturbing news, I thought, yesterday out of Turkey. Tell me, what does that mean for a vote where the opponents are demanding a recount? Some troubling signs that that some of the votes may not have been counted there. And the government saying immediately there will be no recount.
Worrisome and part of a pattern of increasing authoritarianism that we're seeing from President Erdogan. The bad news is Turkey remains critically important. It would be a geopolitical mistake of epic proportion to let Turkey kind of drift out of the Western orbit. So we're going to have to work with them. We're going to have to pay more attention to them. By mid-century, Turkey's population will surpass that of Russia. It's not only a bridge between East and West, it's a center of power unto itself. So troubling signs, but we're going to have to continue to work with them and try and hold them in the orbit with NATO and ultimately perhaps in the European Union, although that looks a lot harder this morning.
Richard, the last 5 to 7 years, our relationship with Turkey and the internal situation in Turkey could hardly have gone much worse.
Exactly. You know, it wasn't that long ago we held out Turkey as a model, how you were going to have some kind of non-authoritarian open market development in the Muslim world. It's not a model for anyone. Turkey's slogan was, was no problem with any neighbor. Now they don't have a neighbor with whom they don't have problems. This has been a wildly unsuccessful country going in the wrong direction. As the Admiral says, we're dependent on them. I would actually say part of the lesson is we ought to try to start looking for ways to become less dependent on them. This guy's going to be in office at least now till 2029 if he can survive this, which is another way of saying pretty much forever. And Turkey increasingly is following a foreign policy that's not in America's interest. We're working closely with the Kurds in the Middle East. Turkey sees the Kurds as their #1 enemy, their #2 enemy, and their #3 enemy. So we are on something of a collision course with this country. We ought not to kid ourselves. And this has implications also for Europe. This is how refugees can start flowing back into Europe. This is how terrorists could start flowing back into Europe. So it's a terrible situation in foreign policy when you've got a country that matters so much and your ability to work with them is increasingly narrowed.
Admiral, final thoughts?
Agree with Richard. NATO can be an important part of holding Turkey in the orbit because the EU option, I think, is going to go away over human rights and a death penalty. this is another example of why NATO will really matter for us.
All right, Admiral James Stavridis, thank you very much.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.